This time on the Prop Master, well, we finally get to my absolute favorite part of any build. No, it's not the weathering, it's being done with it. That way I can finally stop working on it and I get to have fun with it. That's right, this incredibly long series is finally done. We've had our ups and our downs, kind of like how in this video I put up a background to separate my work from how busy it is back here, and I'm pretty sure I made it worse. But I think you'd have to agree that this is probably the best looking thing that we've done on this channel so far. Now, to get there from a basic paint job that we had before, this is going to take some time. So we better get to work. Okay, so are you ready to start this magical process that's going to take something that looks pretty good, but also kind of looks like it's been painted to look old and beat up, and turn it into something that looks like it really is an old, used object that's been used and abused for a decade or so? Something that really feels like a real object that's part of history, because I know I am. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hit some of the shinier areas, some things that seem a little too new or a little too shiny. We're going to knock those back a little bit with some dulling spray. And it's the same stuff that we've used before when we were trying to knock back some of this, when we had some very shiny chrome paint on here. And unlike that, I want to actually avoid most of these metallic shiny areas. If it's supposed to look metal, I'm going to try to avoid that. I'm more concerned with paint that is too shiny. Of course, these decals that we just put on, we want to get those to not be shiny. We want it to look like paint. Anything that looks a little too new, we can knock back a little bit. And the first thing I want to do is I'm going to take my lights, and I actually want to get a little bit more light on there so that we can see any of the shine. And I'm going to put on my respirator. So let's start out with the decals. And then any areas like down here, if you look over here, this looks much duller than say this looks brand new and shiny. So I want to knock this back so that it looks a little bit more like, you know, our painted silvers. And also, if you'll notice, the way I have this set up is I have it on a little Lazy Susan so I can spin this around. And I'm avoiding the upper part of the jetpack that is right now sort of metallic copper. I want that to be a little bit shinier and newer looking. This is also a protective coating. Okay. And I'm going to clear this can, and then we'll give that a few minutes to dry. Okay, it's been about 30 minutes and everything looks nice and dry. It won't be completely cured for 24 hours, but at least on my matte spray, it's you can go ahead and paint over it at any time. Looking at it, it's definitely taken off some of the shininess of the backing for the decals. I can still see the backing of the decals though, so I'm not 100% happy with that. But the sort of the finish is the same now. But that's just the first step in a long series of steps that will get us where we want to go. Weathering is a buildup of layers, procedures, and processes that you're going to do. With each one of them is going to make you think that you've messed the whole thing up. But you just have to believe in the process, and in the end you'll get the outcome that you're looking for. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do some washes. And you can go out and buy washes, but I've never actually done that. I've always just used latex paint that I've thinned out with water. So the paint that I'll be using is the same basic acrylic paints that I've used for this entire Boba Fett project, which is this Liquitex Basics. It's just an acrylic paint set. I have much smaller tubes for most of my colors, but for my weathering colors, I've actually gone out and bought larger amounts. And those colors are, you have a black, in this case it's ivory black, but I also have a Mars black. It's just the Mars black is a darker black than the ivory black is. And then I also have raw umber, burnt sienna, raw sienna, and then finally red oxide. And those are my basic weathering colors that I use. And this is the ivory black, and I haven't used very much. I just put a little bit in there, and then I'm going to thin this out with some water. Now, one thing that I have learned recently, which really surprised me, was that usually when you put water in your acrylic paint is you get a lot of, just almost barely pigmented water and then clumps of paint that don't want to dissolve. And so when you put it on there, you get a very uneven, you kind of want an uneven coat on here, but if you want something that's a little bit more evenly saturated, I guess is what I'm looking for, if you take some glass cleaner and just give it a few shots, you go ahead and mix this up real quick. It does a really good job of thinning that out without having, clumps. It's a much more even, dilution. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of water, not very much. Probably not a way that you can see. There's a couple of tablespoons of water in there, not very much. But by using the glass cleaner, it really sort of converts the medium body paint into a sort of a light body paint, which then dissolves much easier in the water. And when you're doing washes, you want to start with the darkest colors and build up to your lighter colors. So I'm starting with the black, and I'm going to concentrate at first on just sort of the darker areas. So I don't want any drips at this point. Drips will show up. And I might have thinned that out a little too much. I'm going to add a little bit more paint to this. And I've looked at lots of photos of the actual prop, and it's most of what I've seen on there looks like it just hit all of the lines where two surfaces meet or two colors meet. Just sort of to do it almost like an outline. And they obviously used an airbrush when they did it, but I know most people don't have access to an airbrush, so I'm going to try to avoid that if possible. And when it comes to washes, it's sort of the way you put it on, and then it's also the way you take it off. You can use a sponge or something to put it on with. I'm just going to put it on with a brush, but then I've got some wadded up paper towel, and instead of trying to be really efficient at cleaning it up, I'm just going to dab at it, and I'm rotating the paper towel in different directions and different parts of the paper towel as I go, because I don't want to. What can happen is you can end up hitting the same spot over and over again, and you get kind of a repeating pattern, and that your eye will pick up on that. And you'll look at this and you're just like, I didn't do anything. But after you do a few layers of this, even though you don't want it to be really obvious, but it will actually build up into something that makes a difference. It should be subtle, but it should be there. Ideally, more of a round brush instead of a flat brush like this would be better. But this is what I had available. And one good area to do is whenever you have an angle change, you can hit those areas. That will help to emphasize that. That seemed to me what that looked like they were doing mostly for the actual prop. For their weathering is they used an airbrush and just kind of emphasized every angle change, every joint that was in there, every seam. If they, anything they wanted to emphasize, they hit it with that darker color with the airbrush. If there's something you don't like, you can definitely wipe it completely off of there, or for the most part. And if it's something you really like, you can, leave it alone completely. So I'm just going to go over hitting every sort of line that makes this up, whether it be a difference in angle or a low area or detail. I'm just going to go over everything. If there's already a lot of chipping and stuff on there, I'll probably avoid most of the chipped areas. Kind of go in between them. I think for a lot of this bright yellow and stuff, you could kind of help just to go over a lot of it. I'm not going to let that sit for very long, but it could definitely help to have a little bit of, just smudges and gunk to knock that color down. It's such a bright color and such a flat area of color. It really helps to get some of this, just a little difference in tone. Now in the end, we're going to hit this with some dusting of black spray paint, which will help that quite a bit as well. What I'm doing now is I'm just putting a little bit of this on this area to try and hide some of the seams and things that are on that decal. I'm going to wait a few seconds for that to dry a little bit. I'm just darkening up more where this angle change is. I'm darkening up more of the lower half of that just to emphasize that difference in angle. If you've darkened too much of something you want to be lighter, just go in and rub that off before it completely dries. Like I've said before, it's a buildup of layers, so the first time you do it, you might not be able to see that anything has happened, or you might be able to see that a lot has happened. So it's just a matter of if you're not seeing what you want to see, it's not dark enough, then just keep doing it until you slowly build up enough of the color that it starts to have the effect that you want. So you almost have like a line here. I'm going to break that up a little bit more. And there's not, you might think that I'm going on here with an artist's eye and doing things exactly the way I want it to look, and that's not the case at all. I'm just basically almost at random, other than using the lines that already exist here as a guide to kind of, I want to hit those lines and emphasize them. But other than that, it's essentially just sort of random. If something looks weird, then you can kind of deal with that a little bit by either completely removing it or hitting it with some more pigment just to break up the line that was there. I want to hit these areas where I've got things that are sticking out compared to that. So this overhangs that, so I'm going to sort of emphasize a shadow there. Wanted to stop that before it started to run. Had a little bit too much wash on there. Now for the darker colors, you can leave the paint on for longer, obviously, before you wipe it off. Normally I would do runs and things on here where you could put a lot on there and let it run down naturally, but since this is not something that's been out in the weather just sitting, so you're not worried about rain and rust. Also, I don't know if Beskar rusts, and I don't know how you refill this. If there was an obvious fuel fill area, you could put lots of drips around that, dripping down from that. This doesn't have any of those things, so I don't think drips are going to be a lot of use here. For some of this, it might be better for me to lay this down, just so you don't have where the pigment runs down just a little bit and all collects in one line that's not where you want it. An easy fix for that is to lay this down so that you don't have gravity working against you. I think maybe a smaller brush will let me to do a little bit more. Areas that you would expect to have some sort of grease, like the hinged areas where these thrusters are, those should get quite a bit of the dark of your black. Also areas like under here where there should be quite a bit of shadow, it helps to emphasize those as well. Okay, I'm going to hit that with a hair dryer and we can take a look at it. And it's just that quick. Hopefully it won't come off now if I get it wet. There's a couple areas that I didn't notice before where it's a little bit too like a straight line, so let's deal with that real quick. Especially where you have like a thin, dark line. You know, you want it to be sort of a dark area, not a thin line. Definitely not one with sharp edges. Okay, now hopefully, I did actually work on this side a little bit, which I probably shouldn't for this demonstration, but you can kind of see the difference in, at least I hope you can. So hopefully you can see a difference between sort of the right side and the left side where, at least to my eye, and not on camera, this is just sort of a flat, bright yellow and sort of white here, where we have much more mottled textures and colors over there on this side. And what we did up here for the decals helped a huge amount, actually. I'm really surprised to see how well that did. But I'm going to even out the rest of this, and then we can go on to some other colors. Because this area is kind of in the shade, I'm not sure how to show you. I want to hit this area that's kind of like hidden for the most part. I want to hit that pretty good. Also, all this up here, if this is where rockets are being fired, it should have a fair amount of sort of soot kind of look to it. Especially down inside the slots here. Also, if there's ever anything that you really don't want to emphasize, like right here, hopefully you can't see it. There's that little seam between the two pieces of PVC. I don't want to hit that with this wash because it will sink into that little bitty divot that's there, that little bitty impression that's there, and make a black line. So if you don't want to emphasize something, definitely keep the dark wash away from it. At least the dark wash on a light surface. Gonna lift it on a little too long over here where I've got a little line there, almost like a little mountain range. What I can do at this point is I can take some of my water, just clean water, and see if I can't lessen that up a little bit. Well, that's sort of what I was talking about when I said that it's taking it off as much as putting it on. So I can actually go in with like a true wash and just wash this whole thing. But then where I take it out is going to make the difference. I like to do sort of a combination of both, where I just sort of wash the areas where I really want it to be darker, but then I only take part of that off. And the more layers you do, the more depth it's going to have, the more it's going to look like just years of dirt and grime and less like a paint job. Another way you can emphasize a corner is instead of going over on the corner, you can just pick one facet of the corner, one side, and paint that side so that it'll be slightly darker than the other face. Preferably make the side that is not facing directly at you the darker side. For these, because I want to clean more of it off of the top surface and less of it out of the recesses, I'm trying to make this as flat as I can. And I'm just wiping it off. And I'm doing it for two reasons. First of all, I want to emphasize the depth of these little holes, or these little slots. But I also want to emphasize that if you have rockets launching from this area a lot, you're going to get that sort of dust buildup, that soot buildup, but also you'd be more likely just to wipe this off if you saw a lot of it. And so you've got cleaner here and then dirtier in the little nooks and crannies. And don't feel like you have to get it all done, all of your emphasizing and all of your grime done with this one color. We're going to do lots of different colors with different, layers. So if it's not perfect yet, we're not done. I think it's safe to say that the thruster bells down here, the nozzles, would be fairly sooty as well. Once your rag gets pretty saturated, you can kind of use it to add a little bit of color or a little bit of darkness onto something. Going to deal with this a little bit up here. I'm not pushing hard because I don't want to get the paper towel into those little grooves there. I'd like for the wash to stay in there. If I don't get the effect that I want, I can go in with a marker at the very end. I feel like I'd like the corner on this to be dark. So I'm putting quite a bit on here because I know that it'll sort of pool up in that corner. Now I've just got a Q-tip that I'm going to come back in and sort of clean a lot of it off that's not in that corner. I'm not worried about below here so much. I'm more worried about, you know, what's up here on the side. I don't want that to be like a black line. It can be darker, I just don't want a line. Okay, I think I'm going to hit that with the hair dryer, and then maybe we can move on to another color. Let's see if I can't feather this a little bit. Just dipping my finger in some clean water. Now we can do the exact same thing with some of the other colors. Let me go ahead and mix those up real quick. So the next wash is going to be raw umber, and that's sort of the least red or yellow of all of the sort of browns that we have coming up. This is sort of a regular black clay looking sort of color. And I want to be fairly sparing on all the rest of the colors. You know, we kind of did everything with that black because it's oily and, you know, sort of grease and just general grime sort of adds a little bit of general mottledness, you know, some relief to just a flat color. I'll come up with the words eventually. But this is going to be a little bit more like we're just adding some dirt stains. I pretty much stick to the corners with this. And not all of them. I'm also going to pretty much stick to horizontal surfaces. You can also use this like, eventually I'm going to get to a more sand color, which will be perfect for, you know, there being a little bit of sand from Tatooine on here. And this will also work for sort of the dark shadow areas of that. And I'm going to use my dirtiest of the rags here. Get a little bit into these little notches. This is also a color that works fairly well for grease and grime. So I'm going to, once again, I'm going to hit these sort of joints down here for the thrusters. This is a good color for any of the little nooks and crannies. Okay, I know we didn't do much there, but I'm just, you know, you want there to be a range of colors and stuff, and mostly at this point I'm just trying to break up the how much black is everywhere. And I think I'm going to skip over most of the other colors I use for weathering and go to Let's go to the burnt sienna. It's a little bit redder color, and I'll mix that up and I'll be right back. Okay, so this is the burnt sienna. I'm going to do basically the same things I did with the last one. I'm just going to hit a few of the horizontal surfaces. I'm going to go ahead and take it up almost immediately because I'm just wanting to add some warmth and some warm splotches to everything as opposed to just black splotches to everything. Just going to add a little bit more interest, and so things aren't just a flat color. You could do some of the other surfaces. It doesn't have to be horizontal surfaces, especially like some of the black areas. So unlike the black when we did that, I really wanted that eventually to show up. This I want to just be an overall tonal quality to it to be a little different. That may have been a little extreme there actually. It almost makes it look like the red is showing through. I think I'm going to hold off on this particular wash on the whites. It works pretty well for the reds and obviously the reds, but the blues and the yellows I think is where it's going to work the best. It probably won't show up at all in the reds. You can leave a few areas here and there without wiping it up, I suppose. I think that's going to look a little too much like rust there, so let's get most of that off. In fact, I may go back in with the black. I think the black looked a little better. I may want to go back in with some of the black as well on those areas. Just to bring out some of that detail. I could probably come in here and get a little bit inside these little, maybe. This is the black, by the way. I don't know if that did anything at all, but it was worth a try. Let's get some more of that yellow. Just looking through on the display, and this is actually quite dark. I would say dark, but there's a lot of black in this area. It's very smudged up, and on the screen it looks almost totally yellow. So this is a little bit more dramatic than what it looks on the screen. And I guess that's one of the reasons why weathering and damage on a prop looks so fake in real life. It's because it has to be really, really exaggerated to show up on camera. So this is actually much more subtle than what would be used for an actual on-camera prop. Okay, I think that's good enough for this. Let's go ahead and go on to our more extreme, which is the raw sienna. This is the one that I think is going to be the best for simulating the sands of Tatooine. So let me mix up this color and we'll do it. Actually, let's see if we can go ahead and mix the color here so you can actually see what I'm doing. I tried to show you before, but it wasn't real obvious. So I'm just going to put a little bit. That was actually a little more than a little bit, but not a huge amount by any means. And then I'm going to just give it a couple squirts of the window cleaner. And that will basically just, maybe I should show you one with just water, where I can see that it's really very clumpy when you use water alone. Now this isn't like a magic trick or something that's like 100% different. If you don't have window cleaner, don't go out and buy it just for this. But if you have some, it does definitely make a much smoother, paint when you dilute it. And then I'm going to add very little. This is maybe a little bit too saturated of a color at the moment. Let me check it and see. No, I think it'll work. If it goes on, if it looks like it's going on too heavy, then I can always add a little bit more water later. And this is what I'm going to use as sort of the sandy remnants of dust storms and stuff like that on Tatooine. So for this sandy remnant color, I'm basically going to do, once again, all horizontal surfaces and corners. And I'm going to hopefully let it sort of sit and then dry, as opposed to wiping it up. We'll see how that looks anyway. This may be a little bit too saturated to sit and let dry. Let's see what happens when I wipe it up. It's not too bad, but I think we're gonna add a little bit more water to it just because it's pretty orange when it goes on. And I'm gonna have to make this quick because my battery is running down. Try to keep it off the white if this is anything like the other color. See, what I'm hoping is it'll just sort of collect a little bit here and there in the corners and then look like there's some sand that's wedged in there. Yeah, unfortunately up here, I'm afraid it's going to look more like the yellow is poking through, like it's been painted yellow. So probably not going to do the inside of that. Because instead of looking like sand's in there, it just looks like it's been painted yellow. Or not painted red, I guess would be the way to say that. This is the black, by the way. I only have the black, and then every other color that I've mixed, I've just mixed in the same container. Poured the old stuff out and made new. Okay, this is starting to work, and I do kind of like it. It definitely has that look. Let's zoom in a little bit. Definitely has that look in the corners of like there's some sand. It's just kind of accumulated in the corner. I think if we do some sort of washes here, it's going to continue to look like there's just a thin film of sand. So maybe do the washes first and then go back and hit the corners so you can wipe this up pretty good and then leave the others to pool up. It definitely likes to stick to the white in a way that I don't particularly like, because we're not looking to simulate rust, and that's kind of the way it looks on the white. Okay, and I like the way that looks. Hopefully it shows up somewhat in the, I almost said on film, but on screen I guess would be the way to go. Okay, so I'm gonna let my phone charge up and let this dry a little bit, and then we'll go on to the next step. Okay, I'm back and my phone is completely charged, and this looks to be completely dry. And I gotta tell you, this looks fantastic. I really have the urge to dust off a bunch of sand. That's what when I see this, my first thought is, man, that's dusty. I need to clean that off. So that worked perfectly. It just feels like it has a very light coat of sand on it. Okay, so now that we're done with all the washes, I've got another technique. I've mixed up some more. Essentially it's a wash. It's the same ratios of everything, but this is a 50-50 mix of raw umber and burnt umber. And I don't think I'm going to do much of this, but a little bit, just to vary up any patterns. And I just have my little flat brush, and I'm just going to do some little splatters here and there. You might have to get close. You don't even want to almost even notice it. The bigger brush. You obviously don't want a lot of paint on here. And I'll start out further away and just get closer until I can see that it's doing something, but I don't want much. And I mostly want this on the yellow, I think. I don't know if you can see it, but that was a lot. And it's actually fine. I could leave that and it would be okay. But I think I'm gonna at least lighten it up a little bit. And also up in this area, I noticed that there was a lot of splatter up there in the, at least in the stunt version. But they weren't real intense. They were, so we're just gonna leave that for a second and then dab it off. They were like that. So they were there, but they weren't real intense. Go back to the smaller brush. I think I want to get most of it off of the white, although it looked pretty nice there, so maybe not all of it. You know, if something looks good, leave it alone. If it looks a little too much, then you can, you know, wipe it all off completely if you need to. I assume you can tell what I'm doing. I'm basically just, you know, I'm pulling back. If I can get where you can see somewhere. I'm just pulling back and letting go, and it slings the paint that way. I mean, if you're smart, you put on gloves first. Or if you're like me, you end up with lots of paint all over your hands. I'm having to get quite close to get this to really do much. Depending on the brush and how much water is in your paint and your wash and all that kind of stuff, will have a lot to, will affect that effect quite a bit. So basically you're gonna have to start off being further back and then working your way closer until you like the way it looks or how well it's working. And I think that's pretty good for that. Well, I'm gonna go back and do some more up here. There was actually quite a lot of it up in this area here. And they were not little pinpoints like this, so they're definitely, you put them on and then dab them off and make them more of a not as intense and larger little splotch. You don't want to smear them, you just want to tap them. Okay, I think that's enough from the splatter point of view. And the next thing I was going to do is I was going to show you how to use some of the silver or aluminum paint to dry brush on to make it look like there's a worn area. But I can't really think of any place, since this is on your back, I can't think of any place where there would be something constantly, rubbing on something that would slowly wear off the paint and that sort of an effect. So I just don't know how practical or how realistic that effect's going to be for the jetpack. But you've seen me do it on the helmet and some other things. But I do think we could do some dry brushing in other places, just not with the silver. And I've got a couple of old, beat up and cheap brushes. This is one that I've used several times and it's definitely abused. It's a little dusty now. This is a super cheap brush that's great for putting adhesives on and stuff. I just cut the edges of it off so that it's a little bit smaller. I don't want there to be big flat areas. I want there to be, if I had a round brush, that'd be the best. But this will work for what I'm doing. And I'm taking some raw umber. That's more than I needed to put down there. And I'm going to put a tiny bit of this ivory black, which is the less black of my blacks. And that's way more of that than I need. And I'm going to take some of that black and mix it with the raw umber. I don't want it to be black. I want it to be a very dark, just sort of grimy color, but not jet black. It's kind of a greasy looking color right there. How much of that can you see? Now I'm going to wipe most of this off. And this is pretty much just a, I'm putting paint on. There's not going to be much taking paint off with this. So I'm just going to kind of hit it in an area, smear it around a little bit with my finger just so that it's not, such an obvious, someone painted that on there. And this is pretty much just going to be for some of the darker blues, maybe the red. If you did this on the yellow or the white, it would be probably way too intense. Besides, they look really good the way they are now, so. You can kind of do the same thing we did before where we're just sort of darkening the edges, but you want to get a little bit more random than that as well. We just want to break up the solid, sort of flat areas that are one color. And you want it to be almost unnoticeable. Also, areas that would be hard to clean, we want to hit those. I need a smaller brush for that area. If it's going to be a really sort of grimy area, I don't have to wipe most of it off, but you want to use a much smaller brush. I want to have a lot more control with this. Another place that really needs this color, and quite a lot of it, is down around the thrusters. That looks pretty good, I think. Yeah, I'm not really liking that big drop that dried right there. Let me see if I can deal with that a little bit. The easiest thing to do is probably just try the X-Acto knife and see if I can't scrape it off. You can also try a sanding stick and just very lightly go over it. If worst came to worst, I could just scratch all the way through all the paint to the silver. But I think that's going to work. Let's see if you can actually see that. Well, you can kind of see that. Some of that looks like a shadow, but most of that is just paint. Looks like I might need a little bit, sort of in this area right here. Okay. We might try something that's got a little bit more black in it. I'm just working a little bit more of that black into that paint. Much more of a gray than a brown now, albeit a very warm gray. The back's always a good place to practice. And if it looks like I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just kind of winging it. There is no plan. That's the main thing when it comes to weathering. I really do not have a plan. I just have some procedures that I go through. Places that are hard to clean, get in those areas. I want to say in the pictures there was like a big smudge across here on the actual prop. I think there was another one higher up on this side. Make that a little bigger. Ideally, you want it to where you can get in there and just really rub it, and it only slightly darkens that area. Occasionally, you'll get a spot that you weren't able to wipe off earlier, and you'll get a real intense amount of paint. And those you can just go in with a damp rag, and you can clean almost all of that up. This is probably also a good way to go in around your decals. Now we might be able to go in with some silver on top of the decals just to break up the black in the decals. I don't want to do much of that because it's not like that on the prop, but that would help to sell the fact that it's painted on. Now on the ones that I did down here and here, those were pretty much beat up. So those would be really good areas on those more broken up areas of those graphics that you could go in and hit with a little bit of silver. I have to say I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah. Maybe we could break up the red just a little bit up here. Remember, this area should be a fairly, carbon buildup. And you can kind of go back in areas that would be easy to clean and clean those a little bit. Anytime you see an area that's just a little bit too even in color, give it a little dab here and there just to break it up a little bit. And we should probably get a little bit up on the rocket itself. Like I said, this is should be much newer than the rest of the jetpack, so it won't be anywhere near as dirty. The next thing I like to do, which I don't see very many other people do, is I like to just give it a dusting of flat black, which means I'll get 3 feet back, about a meter back, and just lightly dust some of this paint in that area. Let me shake this up for a minute and I'll be right back. And this would be a good time to put on your respirator. It's hard for me to talk with it on, and I'm not going to be spraying a lot, so I'm not going to, but you should. Now I'm going to concentrate a lot on this area right up here because this needs to be quite dark. But this up here, and of course the areas around the thrusters, I would think would have quite a bit of soot on those as well. Definitely want to concentrate up here. I don't want this to be anywhere near as dark as this up here. Coming in at different angles. Okay. Part of me thinks I should have sort of masked off some of my scratch areas first. I think what I might do real quick is take one of those Q-tips and see if I can't wipe that off. I don't want to completely clean it off because I like the fact that this is, this isn't paint, this is, soot or whatever. I could even go so far as to get some alcohol to help clean this off. And if I need to, I can always go back over some of that with silver. Now I'm going to do some more of the rest of the jetpack. Very light, because it's actually looking pretty dirty as it is. Hitting sort of around the bottom of the thruster cones. I think any more than that, I'm in danger of making this look like it's ready for going on to be shot instead of in real life. We definitely want this to look good in real life. Obviously, if you're doing this for a fan film or something for a photo shoot, you probably want to go with a little bit more contrast. You want to have less of the middle tones and really exaggerate the brightness of some of the colors and the darkness of some of the other colors, to really make this, more extreme on your weathering. Okay, I'm going to lay this on its back real quick, and then we'll be back. Now with this on its back, we can do some weathering on the bottom here. And I'm basically just going to stick with the spray paint at this point. And once again, I'm just going to dust it from about a meter away. Trying to stick with the bottom and not hit all this top up here. especially around where the thrusters are, should have a little bit more than you'd expect. Kind of try different angles so I can get up in this sort of vent area. Okay, pretty happy with that. I may go back and do a little bit of the washes at the bottom as well. But now I'm also going to just kind of dust the inside of the thrusters just a little bit here. Once again, I'm coming from all different angles so I can kind of get everything evenly. Part of me is tempted to do the same thing now with white, but I think I'm going to stick with this way it is. And then I just need to do the other one. Okay, and that should pretty much take care of the black spray paint. But while I'm down here, let's go ahead and do some washes on the bottom. I still have my black. I'm just going to add some more water to it. And I'm just going to use the same brush that I did with the others. This is the same wash that we started off the whole process with on the rest of the jetpack. I think maybe we'll get the inside of this a little bit. Probably should have done this before we did the spray paint, just because the spray paint is actually going to inhibit this water-based paint from sticking to it. I'm just doing it kind of random. Now there's just one last thing that I want to do and we'll be done. But before I can do that, I'm going to have to let this paint completely dry so I can go ahead and stack it back up again. So, I'll give it an hour and then we'll come back and do one last thing. Okay, so I'll let this dry long enough that I don't have to worry about it just rubbing off of the bottom when I stood this back up where it is. And looking at it, overall I'm extremely happy, but I think this is a little too much black up here. So I'm going to go ahead and cover this whole thing up again, and I'm going to hit this with a little bit of the copper and the red. So I just have a trash bag here and cutting the end of it off. That's just one of the bottom corners. And I'm just taking some of my blue painter's masking tape. So obviously the best thing to do was if I'd done this sort of the opposite way and masked this whole thing off before I did the black. Then I could probably just go back a little bit and hit it with a little bit of black. Because I do want there to be a little bit of black here, just not very much. This is obviously the part that would go, when the rocket is launched, this is the part that goes, so it really shouldn't be covered with soot. Okay, don't have to get too serious about this, just kind of mask off what I don't want to get covered with the copper. Now, just like I did with the black, I'm just going to hit this with the bright copper, or was it bright coat copper, just like we did originally. Okay. Now I'm going to let that dry for 30 minutes and then we'll come back and hit it with just a little bit of the red. Actually, I don't think I need to wait that far. I think I'm just going to hit it with the hairdryer for a little bit and then go ahead and put the red on. Now I'll just have the satin claret wine color, and just want to dust this from below up, just like we did originally. Definitely like having it on this Lazy Susan as opposed to having to walk around it like I did originally. Okay, I think that works. Now I'll let this dry for a couple of hours, and then we can peel off all the paint that's on top of the masking fluid. I'm going to go ahead and take this off, since the paint that was underneath it is less than 48 hours old. So let's go ahead and make it stick to this tape as little as possible. Yeah, it doesn't look like it pulled anything off at all. Okay. Part of me wants to hit that with black again, but I'm not going to. I think it's pretty good the way it is. So once again, wait 2 hours, and then we'll take a look at it and peel off all the paint that's on the masking fluid. This has had plenty of time to dry, so we can go ahead and start removing this paint and see what we've got underneath. Now, this has been under paint for, well, thanks to editing a video and then making a second video and editing it before we even start working on this one. It's been several weeks that this has been covered up by paint, so I'm curious to see what we have underneath here. Just got a tongue depressor. It is very gummy. I can't tell if there's any silver under here at all. So I'd say leaving this masking fluid on here for a month at a time is probably not the best choice. This doesn't even feel like latex anymore. It feels just like syrup or something. It's just really sticky. I wonder if water would do anything, or if this is... I don't want to use like alcohol or anything because it's just going to destroy the finish of the paint. Just got a little bit of water here, just water to see if it's going to do anything with this. It's just how sticky it is. Okay, so you shouldn't have this problem because you're not going to wait a month in between when you spray paint this and when you peel off the paint. For you, it's going to be, a couple of days. So I'm going to see if I can't clean this up. I'm going to have to take this down and work with it. I'll let you know what I had to use. Okay, so I finally have this taken care of. I started out like you saw, and then I decided I had to get rid of how sticky it was. It was super sticky. So I first grabbed the Windex glass cleaner because it was there and tried it, and it actually was starting to work a little bit, but it was still super sticky and I couldn't get all the gunk off of everything. So I tried some Simple Green, and that worked a little better, but still it was just, I had to go ahead and try the denatured alcohol, and that did work without removing too much of the paint. So I'm pretty happy with the way it actually is at this point. And unfortunately, there is pretty much none of the silver actually left. Actually, at the very tip top up here, there's a little bit of silver left, and it actually looks pretty good up there. I wish the rest of it looked like that. But for the most part, it's just primer or plastic. So I had talked about wanting to show you the technique of doing the chipping with the, painting the silver on top of stuff. But I couldn't do it earlier. Well, I guess we're going to have the chance to do it now. Now this technique works way better on areas where something's just been rubbing on paint for a long time and it has rubbed that finish off. Actual chipping is less effective with this style. It tends to just look like it's silver paint on top of something. I mean, it works really well for edging. If you want to do like some nicked edges, that seems to work fine. But when you get into areas that are more flat, it's just not as effective. So I'm going to try to go on without any blending. I want it to be sort of sharp edges of silver, at least as well as I can do. Also, you want it to be as flat. If you have like a domed blob of silver or mirror on here, it's going to look like paint on top of that other paint. You don't have to use the mirror. In the past, that Rust-Oleum aluminum has worked very well, but I think the mirror is a little thinner paint, and so I'm going to go with the thinnest paint as I can get on this, because I'm putting it on right next to what is also a very thin paint, which is this copper. And what I'm doing is I'm sort of tapping it up against the edge of the copper paint. And I'm definitely going to have to paint over some of this copper paint, because I'll never be able to get anything as precise as some of these little bits. Now, if that copper paint has some dimension to it, I'm going to go back and see if I can't wipe it off, or I might even have to go in with some of the spray some of this copper into one of my containers and just lightly touch those up with the copper color. If you're doing chipping, you just want to make sure there's no gradation in the edge. You want it to be a sharp, hard edge of silver. Now it works really well for the edging. Another thing you can do is to take like a little dowel, or what I can use is the edge of one of these Q-tips. I didn't really mean edge, I meant, here we go, the stick end. And I just dip the stick in here, and then I can just kind of roll that across just the edge. This works better on more complex, if you had like lots of little things that were sticking up. And you can even it does pretty well for larger areas. What it's going to do is it's only going to hit the top area, and if there's any lower areas, it's not going to hit those at all. If you're using the brush, I like to just sort of stab into the corner a little bit. You have to do it much more randomly though. I don't mind that this is going to be shinier than the rest of it, because, like I've said several times, this should be a much newer piece of the jetpack. I don't know what he got into just recently that did this much damage to something. Maybe his rockets are just stored somewhere where they get banged around. So it may not have been on him all this time, but wherever he keeps them stored, they get beat up. If the paint starts to get thin, get some more paint. You don't want any of that translucent, fuzzy edge stuff. That's what's going to look like paint on the outside instead of paint underneath that's being revealed. It would also be nice, I have a flat brush and I can lay the brush in one angle and sort of repeat that tapping of that, and that'll kind of look like a large scratched area. There's only one place on the jetpack that I feel like might be rubbed somehow, and that is maybe up here, where your helmet is probably around here somewhere. So I figured it's, be knocking paint off here, and it might rub in this area right here a little bit. And for that, I am going to do the dry brushing technique. So I just want to build up an area. Wipe most of it off. I like it to be sort of, in this case, it's a helmet to be rubbing there, so it's going to be more of a round pattern. I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and take this over where I can take a look at it in better light and just make sure that I got everything. Then maybe we'll go back with some of this copper color and touch up some of those edges. It actually looks a lot better than I thought it was going to. The areas where it is gray, for the most part, the areas where the silver just turned gray, looks sort of like a primer layer or some kind of an in-between layer between the silver and the copper. And for the most part, looking at this, it reads like the copper is on top of the silver. So I'm pretty happy with that. It's not 100% ideal. I mean, there is some texture to some of the silver. Overall, I'm pretty happy with it. But it still has a little bit of it's a little too bright and shiny. So I'm going to try to tie this together a little bit with some of the matte spray and also a little bit of the matte black. So first this and that thing I've been using, this Model Masters lusterless matte spray. And I'm not going to put a lot on here. I'm just going to do a little bit on there just to take it down just a little bit. You don't want to get too heavy because it looks fine now, but when it dries, it's going to be a lot matter, and I don't want this to look dull. So I'm going to give that a few minutes to dry up, and then we'll take a look at it. That's had time to dry, and I'm happy to say it still looks metallic, but it is a little bit more consistent in how shiny it is. Now to go along with that, I'm going to hit it with a little bit of just flat black spray paint. The same way we did it down here, we're just going to do a lot less of it. I mean, I kind of did the whole thing too. I'm not just concentrating on this lower area. About 3 feet out. I don't want it to really be noticeable. I just want it to help tie everything together a little bit. Okay. And I think that's the last thing we need to do on this entire build. And I'm extremely happy at the way this looks. I think it definitely, it has the sort of the grime and the dirt that you really want, and it really looks like it's been used. It's like an everyday use piece of equipment. Yep, I'm super happy with this. I do know that a lot of you were asking originally how much this weighs, and I can tell you right now, it is not super light. This is going to give you the feel of actually having something that would, let you fly. It definitely has some weight to it. It's not uncomfortably heavy, but it is not light. Also, the advantage of that is that if you're doing a fan film or something like that, it's going to move like something that's heavy moves. Now, it's definitely not going to be a stunt jetpack. I can tell you that right now. It is, well, let's go ahead and put it on the scale and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, I've got the scale all zeroed out with the wood that this is going to sit on. And let's see what this actually weighs. Now the black numbers are pounds and the red numbers are kilos. And this weighs about 14.5 pounds. So it's not going to break your back or anything, but it might get a little tiring if you're going to spend 8 hours, on the floor of a con or something. However, I've spent more time than that with a backpack on that weighed substantially more than 15 pounds. So, I mean, it's definitely doable. And it will have the advantage of moving like something that actually has some weight to it. So the one last thing we want to do is let's go ahead and attach this to the rest of the costume. Okay, so here's the rest of the armor on the mannequin. And to put this on, it's pretty simple. I'm just going to hook these onto these clips up on top first. Okay, so it just kind of hangs there. And then you can lift it up and set it onto the aluminum rod that is in the sort of rack that holds it. Now, I think I need to adjust these straps so that they're a bit tighter so that this fits more like that. That's okay. And unfortunately, this mannequin, while it does a pretty good job of displaying the armor, I don't think it's going to be cut out for the extra weight of the jetpack here. So I think I'll probably display this separately. Taking it off is just as easy. Lift it off of the rod. So putting it on and taking it off is as easy as that. Let's look at one last thing. Because I can't really display this on the armor, I made a little display rack. Okay, this is what I made so I could hang this on the wall. And if you'll recall, I made 2 of these brackets. And so I just took the one that I didn't actually use and I cut out a piece of 1x wood that was the same shape as this part here, but slightly smaller, so that this actually hangs out past that. And I just glued that onto a piece of 1/4-inch plywood, then glued this onto that piece of 1x wood, and I cut some slots so I could run my straps. Now they really just barely stick out from the holes there, but that's enough that it can hook onto. And then I can just attach the jetpack directly onto the wall the same way I would onto the armor. And this is what it looks like when it's hanging on the wall. Okay, let's talk about this project while we take one last look at the finished jetpack. Now, this is definitely one of the most complicated and biggest jobs we've done on this channel. But I hope that doesn't deter you from actually trying to work on this. A lot of people seem to stop watching this project, I think just because it was so complicated. But at the same time, I think I've broken this down into steps that should make it pretty simple. I mean, when I say it's complicated, it was difficult to put together the pattern and source the materials and that kind of stuff. But as far as actually doing it, I think if you follow along with the videos, it shouldn't be that difficult. And I think almost anyone could do this jetpack. And even if you decided to go ahead and buy a jetpack from Etsy or some other vendor online, I think just following along with the painting tutorial would be extremely helpful, including the weathering techniques that we talked about today. And I know this took a long time to do. I started working on this project a good 2 years ago, but 90% of that time was taken up in research and making the templates, designing templates, correcting templates, and editing. The editing alone took forever. If you were actually just working on this project, it's probably maybe 4 to 5 weeks. And it'd be a lot shorter than that, but unfortunately the painting process is about a week and a half, maybe a little longer, depending on how many steps you actually take. But as far as the actual workload, it's really not that bad. Don't be scared off by the 2-year time span this took. Also, half of that time was the prototype. The actual work on this is probably somewhere around 40 hours of work altogether. So it's a big job, but it's not that monumental a job. And like I said, I think this project has cost me a few followers, or maybe not followers, but at least people that are currently watching the videos. So that, has me in a little bit of despair, but at the same time, looking at the final product, I am extremely pleased with the way this turned out, and I'm happy to have done the project. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. There are definitely some things that I would have done differently if I could start over from scratch. Mostly there were some images that I didn't have until I was, more than halfway through the project. Things that showed that the central barrel should be maybe an inch to an inch and a half further out from the back of the jetpack, that makes it sort of deeper. I don't know that it looks better than my jetpack, but that is the actual prop. So I think I would have done that a little bit differently if I'd had, if I could do it all over again. But as far as the overall scale of it and the way it looks, I could not be happier for it. I think either wearing it or just when it's displayed on my wall, it looks fantastic. I think it's overall a pretty durable build. During the painting process, I had it kind of stashed away in a back room, and somebody went back there and didn't see it and actually stepped on it. And it's still in good shape, even though it got stepped on by an adult. The top rocket got bent just a little bit, but I was able to bend it back. It didn't seem to do any permanent damage. So it's a fairly rugged piece. I think it's easy to put on and take off. It's not that heavy, but it does move like something that has some weight to it. So I think it's going to be a fantastic addition to Boba Fett. Now, with all that said, if you have any comments or questions, please go ahead and ask them below. I will answer them back immediately. It's those comments, questions, and things that really, you've heard it 1,000 times from me. That's what motivates me to make these videos. And if you liked it, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And, liking and subscribing is maybe not the most important thing to YouTube, but it definitely helps motivate me. Now that we've finished this, the next project is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to still keep it in the Star Wars genre, but it's not going to be Boba Fett. I'm just going to take a step back for a second and work on some Nerf style lightsabers that I've been making for quite a while now, and they hold up really well, and they're, a pretty fun toy. So with that in mind, I look forward to the next video. But until then, thanks.